public agencies themselves and the school systems and organizing groups, which means we get to work with some really interesting constituencies that don't always like each other and don't always play well together, and we often get to be that interesting middle person role, whether we're bringing data or policy to bear on very complex public decision processes. And my team is our research and technology team, and we do this concept of data-driven cities. We have, most of you are familiar with the idea of data-driven in organizations and in non-profits or in the private sector, but we basically supply and build and create this ecosystem of data-driven cities broadly for a community. So this is the stack that we think we use as far as physically doing the things and how we think of things. And so for there to be data-driven cities, this is how we approach it. Firstly, everyone needs to have good access to public data. It should be free and easy. There needs to be useful analysis of that data, otherwise data without meaning is worthless. And then someone needs to actually communicate the results, and this is something that we often see done badly, is the government might do some analysis, but then there's no real communication or interpretation that means anything to an audience. And then this is all nice if this all happens in the elite world of the researchers and the academics, but if our community doesn't have the capacity to understand the data and some of the technology and make some decisions around it, then we're keeping the power out of the community's hands generally. And for us, engagement is a big deal. And so we can produce a report and put it out there or get a bunch of data or build a new tool. But if we're not engaging with our community, then what we're doing generally won't have an impact, won't have as big an impact. And we won't really get to see, essentially, government doesn't do a lot of user testing and non-profits don't do a lot of user testing, right? But if we're doing things that are meant to have an impact at work, then we need to be thinking about that differently and doing what is essentially user testing, which is engagement for us. And then we need to be measuring the impact of all this, and this is something that non-profits and governments do really badly generally, is actually measuring what they're doing and how it's working. So let me switch gears a little bit. I'm going to talk about a story about us and the web. This is kind of how we deal with and approach web technology. So for our projects and for our initiatives, we build open source content management system based sites. And they're small, they're agile, they respond to needs, and they're pretty decent. We have this horrible, archaic, built-in 19-something organizational websites. If you look at that, none of us alive are responsible for it. The whole is to blame. We've never been given permission to change it. We publish data to the web very aggressively, and we're one of the leading organizations, non-profits in the country to do that. And then we like the Twitters and we like social media. And this is kind of generally our approach to using the web. But I want to give you one specific example of where we've changed things. So there's a thing that we always deal with is that people need services. And if we're smart and have iPhones and know about it and have a network, we know that we can find it online or in Google Maps or whatever. But if we don't have a good job and a smartphone, we don't know about all these great ways to find things, we're stuck with the old ways of finding things, which means a phone or a friend or maybe the library, often very analog and often very clunky and very slow and very hard ways to disseminate good information about what's out there. And this is a thing that we tackle and see a lot. And so what generally happens is that there's a service, say like 211. How many people have actually heard of 211? So very, very few of us. So it's obviously perfectly advertised, right? You all know that this is what you use to get access to services. So clearly there's a marketing issue. And the problem is even worse was when you go to use a 211 system, which is basically the way that you find either a referral for food stamps or job training or employment assistance or housing assistance. Really important stuff, especially if you're a working class, low income family. This stuff really matters to you. This is the so-called safety net provision layer. But the interfaces suck to this, and there's no mobile interface. The web UIs really aren't helpful. The terminologies are really old. And this is how people are meant to find services. And typically, the solution is that what government says, or we might say as an organization, that we need to build a really good way for people to find X type of services. And so we'll build one. And then so-and-so agency will build one, and this agency will build one, and we'll say, there's a niche here, we'll build another one. And what happens is we get lots and lots of these resource directories or resource guides that generally are often a paper and are out of date when they're printed. And even the online ones are basically out of date because there's no plan to maintain the systems. And so what we end up is with every man and his dog has a resource directory. Every government agency has a resource directory. But the problem is they're not really getting to this guy with needs. They're sitting out there, being not used, being not maintained, and that's a problem, and that sucks. And so every now and then someone comes along and rattles your cage and challenges you, and it was this guy. How many know Hans Rosling? He's brilliant, but he's also kind of arrogant at times, and he says things that are really challenging, and sometimes that sucks, and sometimes that's good. And he has this thing that he likes to say sometimes is that non-profits always think so small, and always think about their local needs and solutions, kind of like government, and that results in niche, one-off local replications of everything we do, and everything is custom, and that's kind of dumb to a degree. And that was challenging for us when we thought about this issue, and people came to us about we need a better resource directory. And so we started thinking that maybe he had a point, and maybe he wasn't so arrogant. Maybe there is something to this idea of not thinking small as a small non-profit with very one or two techs in the staff. So what can we do that's a little different in this space that actually meets our needs around a tech solution to help people find and refer people to better services, but something that also can do more than just what we need locally. And so we didn't build a website, we built an app for the first time. The first live thing that comes out of this app is one of the issues we're struggling with is no one in these coalitions wants to brand it, so it has a horrible URL because there's no branding. But what we built was a Ruby on Rails app with a former Code for America staff member as the key consultant. Built it on Rails and built it not just as a one-time website for a certain coalition or a group, but as an app that is redeployable. And so it's really simple. There's a lot of Yelp style, simple ways to access and drill into and find information. And that's not so unusual, right? You've all seen those, and there's some good ones and there's some crappy ones. And that's great, but we built another one of those. But what was different and what was better, you dig in and you get really, we did a lot of work thinking about the UI, what do people need to get where, and that's not common in government. But what was different was not just the tech stack we used, because generally this would be maybe a Drupal solution or something like that that doesn't really cut and paste, but it was built as an open source app and the code is shared, and it was built so that we could use this for our local instance one time, but then the next time the county agencies said we need to rebuild the healthcare services resource directories, we now have a solution that we can say there is an open source tool that would take you a half a day to redeploy, and you now have a brand new solution. Because every time that people came to us asking, so we need a resource directory for homeless services in Santa Clara or for food stamp services in Washington, D.C., all of these things resulted in these unique systems that cost a lot of money, and if you're a consultant developer, that's kind of maybe good for you. And every government agency is building their own bad interfaces as well. And so what we did this time was actually build an app that's redeployable with a nice clean stack that allows you to basically clone it, and stand it up on Heroku in a very, very small amount of time. And so instead of doing our usual sort of thinking small that we want a website that gives this kind of information to the public, that what we're able to do by thinking about it a little bit differently, working with a developer who understood the value of building things as an open source tool rather than a straight stock website, we actually were able to generate something which for us is exciting because it's the first thing we ever did as a small non-profit that gives back to the open source community, which we've benefited a huge amount from over the years, using everything from open source GIS to web tools. And so this was exciting because it meant that we could actually do something that meant every organization that came to us wanting, this is awesome. We've already had people in Fresno and LA come and say, this is a really cool thing, like this is really nice, like can you build this for us? And it's really awesome to be able to tell them no, but it's actually really easy for you to redeploy it yourself. Hook you up with a developer, and you can actually redeploy this in a very small amount of time. We did a lot of work on a very simple back end to allow the non-tech sort of world to interact and manage the content on the back end, but keeping everything really simple and narrowly focused so it wasn't a massive, huge behemoth of a thing that's really hard for non-tech users to use. So we're really excited about that. And it meant that in future, we don't need multiple solutions for this space because we've built enough of these ourselves to know that there's a lot of things that we need and there's a lot of things that we could be doing better, but a lot of those things we can simply build one thing that can get reused. And that was awesome, but there's some downsides for us. One is that it means that we permanently need Ruby developer on retainer to be able to work on the system and improve it. And there's some bugs in there, and so we're going to need to improve things out of the gate. And always the joys of working with small-scale developers is that they move on and don't want to support the thing they build. So that's a reality, and we're aware of that, and that's not an exciting future, but we're prepared to deal with that. But otherwise, the cost for us to build this wasn't really any more than if we'd hired a consultant web development firm to build a regular website that was a one-time one use. It didn't really cost us any more to do it this way, but it did take thinking differently. The other piece that we're doing at the council, it's a little different, and this is sort of a segue, and I'm not going to cover this long, is that we, a couple of years ago, realized that when we were doing, like when you see a web mapping system like Policy Map or the Google Map equivalents in the social world, is that everyone loves to give you these maps of where crime is or where social services are or where poverty is across the US, but no one likes to give you the data behind that. And a couple of years ago, we decided that when we rebuilt our systems online for publishing data, we'd actually be publishing the raw data behind that as well. And so this is our rethought out cycle of how traditionally we would get data from a government agency and we'd research it, analyze it, and we publish a report. And this is normally where most nonprofits and philanthropic services and government agencies end things, is that we decided that we'd also publish back the clean raw data. So we'd give the government agencies back better quality data that's been geocoded and scrubbed and cleaned. And we'd also publish it for public use as well, where it was safe to do so. And so that was something that sort of stuck with us again, that we can also be contributing a little bit, thinking like through that open source framework of if we do something and gain from something we can contribute back in the same way. That's been a shift of thinking for us, is that we're doing things, we're investing in something, we're getting a return on it, but just because we've finished with the data doesn't mean that the data is expunged and used and finished with, and we can actually enable more by pushing that out there. And that kind of segues into something that I have been a part of for the last year, and that's an organization called N2Local. How many people in the room have heard of Code for America? Code for America? Most people? That's awesome. So Code for America, I'm not going to talk about, because you know, or should know, they're awesome. So what we are in Oakland is, and this is a year-old organization. I'm the executive director of this organization, which means this is my nights and weekend job, which is because it's fun, is essentially an open government organization, a civic innovation group. And so we've been around for a year now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we in open source are bringing and doing in our city. So essentially, we're incorporating as a C3, and so we will be another non-profit. The world really needs more non-profits, but we're going to be one. And we're a real good mix. We're techs, we're advocates, we're researchers, we're librarians, we're government staff. And we're people that love our city and realize that our government in our city can be better, and we can do something about it. And so we meet every week in City Hall. We have a civic hack night every Tuesday. I normally be there right now. And we do things that work towards opening government in a variety of different ways. And everything we do is open source. And so we reuse open source and we develop and publish open source tools. And essentially we're a community organizing group for the tech sector for good, not for private gain. So we use this term civic hacking, and it's a bit of a buzz term right now. It's getting some pushback because every time there's a cyber threat somewhere and people come out with, like Obama sponsored a big initiative called the National Day of Civic Hacking this year out of the White House. And then obviously when Snowden thing boils up, he comes out and uses the word hacker very evilly and very menacingly. It's like, so you just sponsored a hacking event across the country and now you're using the word in negative slang. So thanks for really jacking that clarity up for us. So essentially civic hacking means, it came out of this idea of, in World War II, when there were bombers that were damaged, they would get a hacksaw and they would cut off bits of one plane and put it on another plane. That's the origin of the word hacking, if you wanted a history lesson. I'm sure you came here for that. We're basically hacking for democracy because we're hacking, thinking that our cities can be better and we can hack processes, data, systems, government itself to make it better. And we talk about this concept of open data and open government and open source. The open for us around government is aimed at a number of different levels. We think that it's a real big problem. There's a big societal distrust of government. We don't think that's a situation that's really good or healthy. We think it's problematic that so many government staff are aging out and there's no mechanism to replace the knowledge and the systems that they've built. And we think that there actually is something good and special about public service, but we don't really hold that up anymore in the US. And we also think that our community has a lot to offer at local government, but no mechanism to really contribute that. So that's the short of what we're trying to do with Open Oakland. So a few of the things that we've done there, and anyone feel free to give me a time shout if you want me to keep going for ages or shorten. I can talk for hours, so give me some guides when you want me to wrap up. Okay. So one of the things we did early on is that we're running hackathons in Oakland, getting people together to mess around and build interesting solutions to local issues that mattered. It was realized that San Francisco had led the way again, and you guys do a good job generally with a lot of things. in publishing open data from the city's perspective, but our city wasn't publishing any data at all. In fact, they were generally refusing to publish much data. And so we said, screw it, we can actually do it. We have the technology, we have the interest, and my organization, day job, has a huge amount of data. And so we took an open source system called CKAN, C-K-A-N, that's built by a group out of the UK. I'm not British, by the way. And basically it's a data publishing system. And we stood this up. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but we got it down now. And we basically built a community-driven, community-supported open data catalog, which we now have 70 data sets in the system, and it's all coming out of a community organization and a couple of other local journals that do a lot of data visualization and data science work. And so we built this system to allow local developers to have access to better data from local issues and government sources, so they could build things for hackathons and so they could understand things in their community better. And we even, once we talked the city into adopting an open data platform themselves, we actually bid on that contract ourselves, even though we didn't formally exist at the time, and offered this solution as a community-driven platform, which could be the best ever public-private partnership that government can imagine, because it's already built, we don't need to spend $1 million on it, and they were just a little too nervous about that. So they didn't go with us. But what that meant in the end is that we now had a community data system that was self-supporting and self-sustaining. It gave us a vehicle to publish data from the local nonprofits and from UC Berkeley, and so we're really excited about what this means for us. Now the city has got its own data catalog, but we see them as a nice side-by-side system where community organizations and universities and CDOs can publish data, as well as the official sources of the data from the city, which they're never going to let a non-profit publish data to the city's catalog. And so this is a way for there to be two sources so everyone can easily find and index data across the city. At the same hackathon last year, Code for Oakland, we launched a project called Oakland Wiki. How many of you have heard of the system called Local Wiki? A few of you? Cool. It's really awesome. And if you live in San Francisco, I don't know if it matters or not, but there's not one running in San Francisco yet that's at scale. Essentially, it's a wiki system for a local community, and it's place-based, and so it allows you to basically create your own version of a Wikipedia for your city or your community. And so Oakland Wiki now has over 2,000 pages. They're all obviously user-contributed, but it's a way to produce a slightly less authoritative version of what your city is. It's allowed to be subjective. It's allowed to have you and your perspective, your opinions are allowed to be in there, and it doesn't have to be as heavily referenced as Wikipedia does. But that means that it's a really interesting, funky representation of your city. And so we have people documenting city council meetings, we have people talking about the history of buildings and neighborhoods in the system. And it was all, originally it was built out of Davis, California. But it was built as an open source system, which meant we saw a local need where we wanted to be able to support community building and networking better. And this actually met that need for us. And so we built this for last year's hackathon, and there's been a massive community of people that are sort of coalesced around this, and we're having editing sessions in libraries and historical centers where people will gather and basically take the information out of museums and libraries and actually digitize it where it's stuck on a wall or analog formats. And so we've seen this interesting community jump up. Definitely a big interest in the nonprofit sector as well, about being able to get their stories and their ideas and their histories up on the system as well. Something that was really exciting this year is that for the first time ever, the City of Oakland published the budget in raw data format. And we pushed and pushed. Last year's Code for Oakland event saw an app called Hack the Budget that was built, and it was good. But it didn't have really good fine-grained raw data. It had to be massaged a lot, and it wasn't as detailed. But with a prototype, we actually convinced the city to release the budget in real raw data. So 16,000 lines of an Excel file. And our team turned it into a really amazing data visualization system that lets you actually see the city budget for the first time and interact with it. And so you can pick the police department and see where the money goes in the police department, and pick an individual department or a team or an expenditure item and see exactly what money is going where. And this was the most amazing and illuminating way to ever look at a city budget that we've ever seen. This system is running in Europe, but no other instances in the US yet. And so we're the first ones to build this in Oakland with very fine-grained city data. We presented this to City Council, and the mayor and one City Council basically told us it was wrong. It's a 2-year budget, and it was a kind of stunning lesson because it turned out that within 2 hours we'd verified all the numbers with the city's budget committee and it was right. But seeing everything in proportion for the first time looked so wrong. to the people that built the budget that they thought it was wrong. And that was a really, really interesting takeaway, is that because we normally see things in a spreadsheet and we normally just see a bunch of numbers, we never put those things in context. And that was a really exciting and kind of scary takeaway from that, is that we kind of don't get the proportionality of where we're spending money. And so that was a pretty cool thing.
What page is that on now?
So this exists at openbudgetoakland.org. I always say .com, but it's .org. Openbudgetoakland.org. And there are both these tree maps, is what they're called, which let you dig into certain departments. And this is called a Sankey diagram, and it lets you look at the flow of money between, say, a certain fund and a certain expenditure. And so you can track utilities consumption tax and see that that goes into the general fund and that goes into a bunch of other things, or that that particular source of money, say Measure Y tax, goes straight into public safety. So there's two different ways to look at the data, depending on how you want to see it work. And so one more example that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that, so how many of you in the room would consider yourselves even the slightest bit interested or concerned about or aware of the ideas of UI, UX, user interfaces and user experience? So again, a bit over half of us. So these are, for those of you that don't know it, I'm not an expert, but I'm obsessed by it now. These ideas are one around how things are presented to people and how they navigate them and how they get around your system. And the other is a little bit around how people experience your interface, whether it's the storefront of a social services agency or the website that people experience to interact with your agency. So how people deal with and get around and find and navigate in what you're giving them to experience. And so in government, that's normally something that's missing. Normally websites out of government are never, those two terms are never even raised. Non-profits is probably similar again, unless you've got a great consultant, which is a different story. So your typical city website is, this one's kind of pretty for a change, a little bit. It's very colorful right now. And so it does that usual trick of, and we did this for a long time, of representing yourself to the public the same way you structure yourself internally, which if you don't know, that's a dumb idea. Because when you come as a citizen to this website and want to find out something, like generally when you hit a city website, like what are you generally going to a city website for? Just randomly, just throw out some ideas. Parking tickets.
Find out why they didn't pick up my garbage.
Why the garbage didn't get picked up.
Business names.
Telephone number.
Telephone numbers.
Jobs.
So you're generally going to a city website with one thing in mind, and you normally have a question about how do I do that, right? Like, where do I get this? How do I do this? Why did this not happen? So you have a question. But instead of making it easy for you to answer a question, we give you these structures and say, are you this or this? And that doesn't sort of help you that much. And we have departments and boards, and then further down to individual city departments. And we expect people to dig into all of these different areas. Maybe the search bar will give you something, but it'll give you a lot and it won't always be anything relevant. And so we have these really hard interfaces for people that really want one thing. Like, I want this one thing, I want it easily and fast, but I can't do it. And that's a real point of frustration. And if you're a local business considering something and have trouble finding that, that's a real problem, because that means that your crappy website or your less than wonderful website is now hurting your economic development. And so it's a simple thing, but it can have big consequences. And so what we did is we realized that there's a way to get people information in a much better way. And we held a community event and deployed a piece of open source software that was built in Hawaii, originally in Honolulu. Lots of good things come out of Hawaii. And it's called Oakland Answers. It's another Rails app. And it's basically an open source CMS that was custom built to deal with this issue of when people hit a city website, they just want to ask one question, find the answer, and get out of there. And if you can do that, you're really helping your constituencies in a big way. And so we gathered 70 people from across the community, non-profits, government staff, librarians, teachers, a little bit of everyone, and some developers and designers, and spent the day writing answers to the common questions that people had, based on Google Analytics, based on FAQs that are buried in PDFs 5 layers deep, taking the things that people really need commonly and writing really common sense, human-centered answers to those. So no bureaucracy, simple responses to these issues. And because it was open source, it didn't cost us anything at Open Oakland. We could deploy it very, very quickly for free, a little bit of tweaking, and we could actually collaborate as a community with government and the community together and work on the different questions and the answers and help frame those things up and spend a day working together to do something as a community with our government that was really good at breaking down some of the barriers and some of the ideas that people either don't care about government, or the idea that people in the government are stodgy and don't care about the community. It was a really good informal, casual, safe way to actually interact and work together. And essentially, the idea that we really believe at core is that government really is about what we do together. And normally we pay people to go off and do that for us and think we can just consume and buy stuff. And that's fun, but it breaks down at a certain point where it's not healthy. And this was a really cool way that we could actually tackle a project together. And because it was open source, it meant that there was no procurement process necessary. And because it's cloud hosted, we had the city, help the city set up a Heroku account. City's now got a GitHub account for maintaining and publishing and using open source tools. And we actually built together a really cool system that actually lets people find information really easily. And it wouldn't have been possible if someone hadn't originally built something that was open source and redeployable, and then the city hadn't opened up a little bit and been a little bit vulnerable and said, yeah, we know that there could be a better interface for people to find out what they want about the city, and being comfortable with people actually contributing content. I have this one great example I like to use, is that me and a Code for America fellow who helped work on the project, we had the same sort of moment of every time I'm parking somewhere in Oakland and I can't remember what the hell the yellow curb means and when it's okay to park on the yellow curb, I'll freaking Google it, and every time the City of Berkeley's website will come up. And the laws are different, so that doesn't help me. And so I can guess based on Berkeley, but I can be wrong, and that'll cost me money. And so this allowed people to define the questions they wanted as well, and the city's committed to figuring out how this can be a permanently open system so that when you find out something cool about the city, about a process, is that you can publish the question and the answer yourself and essentially turn it into a long-term wiki for the city. Unfortunately, my example, the parking people decided that it wasn't quite perfect, and they've actually turned it off until they can verify it. So bureaucracy does always win to a degree, but it will magically reappear one day. And so we sort of set out to do this open source tool for our community that was going to solve a civic issue and use the skills of local developers and other people to build something. And at the end of the day, we realized that people thought this was not just a cool thing to do in one day, which is what happened in Honolulu. It was a one-day event and it was done. But it just made so much sense. If you're at a public meeting and you learn something, you should be able to document that in a place that other people can benefit from that knowledge. And this was that thing. We basically had built a wiki without trying to build a wiki. And it was really cool is that people from the city administrator's office were down with that idea of this actually makes more sense than just doing it as a one-day thing. So about half a dozen of us that were leading this effort, all in the one day realized independently is that this shouldn't be a one-day event. This is a really great way to engage people on an ongoing basis. And for you to, just the experience of, how many of you would ever think that you would actually edit and create content for a city website? Don't put up hands, it's a lie. Oh, no.
I got it.
All right, fine. So it's something that we don't expect. And that unexpected is actually a really cool little thing that we're giving people that actually bothered to do something a chance to actually contribute something in a small way, but in a way that then changes on a small level their perception that, well, I can actually engage with government in a little way different than I used to before. And even those small things, those small wins and those small changes, we're excited about. And we're happy to hear about it. And so we have an ongoing ideas, using user voice, to get ideas from people about new projects, new apps, new events that we can do in the city. And we're really excited about hearing from people in other cities about what they're doing that's working, that's good as far as making government better and making communities better and making government more open and accessible. So that's me. That's all I plan to talk about. Questions?
What advice would you have for someone that wanted to do open Santa Cruz or?
Yeah, so I'm obviously biased. I've been involved in Code for America for a long time in multiple roles, and there's not that much out there that I would just natively say this is where you go to. But Code for America has this thing called the Brigade Program, and so their main thing has been their fellowship, where you take teams of techs and developers and designers and put them in government for a year to find solutions to problems. But they have a brigade program now, and I'm the co-lead for Oakland's brigade. We're a C3 organization, but we're also linked with Code for America. And that's the best starting point, is because it gives you a vehicle and a mechanism and a brand to build on. And so I've helped people start them in New Orleans and Pittsburgh and other cities where there's interest in open data or open government or government engagement, and it provides a really good vehicle to actually take tools that are out there to redeploy. It takes a lot of knowledge and learning networks, and there's a lot of support. So that's the single best way to actually do this in a different city, is through Cook America's Brigade program. It's a really cool bunch of people in different cities that have different perspectives and are sharing what's working, what's not working. So it's kind of hard to go wrong with that. There's not a better vehicle for my perspective. Right?
Are there other Pacific banks like in Berkeley or San Francisco or San Jose?
So we've been talking with some guys out of Pitch Interactive about doing something in Berkeley. Wes Grubbs is the guy that runs that group. So they are interested at this point in the open data angle in particular. And so he and I need to talk pretty soon about what that looks like in Berkeley. One of the advantages of that open data platform we showed is that it doesn't have to be a single city use. And so our partners in Colorado actually have a statewide platform that any government agency can publish into, and it's very, very, very cheap for every agency, and it's one system, and they just have a skin that looks like, say, the city of Irvine or the city of Boulder. They're basically a simple PHP or .NET, wrapper that sits out there. It looks like the city's own data website, but it's basically pulling from this one system. And so we're talking about doing that for either the Bay Area or for California, and allowing any city to publish into it as they need, with either no cost or very, very low bandwidth cost. And that's the fun thing about that platform, is it'll actually support multiple cities using it. So yeah, Berkeley is the first place that we've had interest expressed in helping them do more around this. So yeah.
What do you think is the role for nonprofit organizations in the open government civic action space?
So I'm definitely aware that we are a unique organization, so I don't think that our place in this is particularly replicable easily. So we're part of a network called the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership. neighborhoodindicators.org is the site, and that's 37 different cities that do a lot of what we do, so community data and mapping and technology for organizing and engagement.
Can you say that again? What is
neighborhoodindicators.org. And those organizations are a natural fit to do this kind of work, and some of them are actually branching into this space. But it all depends on mission alignment. And so for us, we've had the democratization of data as a formal goal for about 20 years. Long before open data was a word, and long before Tim O'Reilly started any of the stuff, like, we were doing that in a really clunky, slow, analog, digital way. And so that's been a piece of our mission, and so that makes us a natural fit. There's the advocacy groups and transparency groups like California Forward, is a statewide transparency group, and obviously Sunlight Foundation is a leader nationally. But some cities have an organization with an interest in this stuff, and some don't. Some would like align with a community organizing type of organization, and others it might be, say, a research shop. So it varies a little bit in each city. San Diego, there's some tech guys there, and there's some policy people, and there's some data guys that are forming something new with different organizations. So there's a lot of different ways that it can fit, I think. But the nonprofit sector itself, it's a longer conversation, but the nonprofit sector, I think, is going to, maybe within 5 years, start to hit up against this wall of, where's your data? Like, we're giving you all this money. We really don't know where it's going because your reports don't really tell us much. And so there will be that initial barrage of accountability and transparency that's going to start to hit the philanthropic community first, and then as a result the nonprofit community. Because we talk with like San Francisco Foundation and a lot of the big groups locally, and they don't really know where their money's going, like at a geographic level, because they're not collecting the data, and certainly not publishing the real data that tells you. And so if 20 foundations are funding, say, anti-poverty, none of them know how much they're stacking going on top of each other, and one neighborhood's getting all the money, or 10 are getting the money evenly. We don't know those kinds of things, and that's kind of important for decision making and investment. And so it's going to hit the foundation sectors first, because they need to understand where they're doing things, and then they need to be able to share that. And open data for them is the mechanism to do that. But yeah, I think it's going to hit that nonprofit sector as well, as if we're doing all these good things, like, where's the data? Not just on impact, but even just the simple server stuff. Like we don't know who's serving which kids in which neighborhood effectively. And because it's hard or illegal to share the raw data, there needs to be ways of sharing aggregate data for impact and gap analysis and all that stuff. So we do that stuff as well. So it gets tricky. And it gets uncomfortable too. Because there are sectors that are, it's private money, so we have no need to do this, but I would disagree. So that's my opinion. Disclaimer.
So
Go ahead.
what kind of ideas are you looking for, I mean, specifically, and what are you asking for?
Everything from, there's a whole bunch of campaign finance data that no one's ever analyzed. Have a look at that. Or I need a way to find out how to connect with my local crime prevention councils. Because it's really hard to find it on the city's PDFs and stuff. And so small things like that, I built an app for that very quickly. Bigger things like, we're really concerned about the ways that X government commission or board isn't publishing information about what it's doing. And can you help on that? Or we have a paper submission process for tenant complaint forms, and how do we do that differently? So all over the place. Obviously focused on open government, but that's a pretty broad concept. So pretty broad.
Was there any process around the budget data stuff? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the participatory budgeting process that happened in Brazil, like in Porto Alegre. People discuss it,
yeah.
And in Canada also, where they've got citizen councils where people come together and share that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. As far as that, no, it was a team of developers and one very vocal, pissed off advocate that built the original app, and who is actually leading Community Democracy Project in Oakland now. But it was built by those people, and they worked with the city's budget advisory committee, which is government staff. And when it was close to built, started doing more focus groups and engagement with non-profit organizations that were concerned about voting and budget and other issues. So there was some outreach around what people need from it, what are they going to do with it, but it wasn't done as like a broad, large-scale community input initially. It was an idea, 10 people started it, and 3 saw it through and built the app. But it was done by just a bunch of guys on the side. There's definitely some interesting models that we're obviously pushing because they make sense as far as participatory budgeting and deliberative processes that make a lot of sense, that right now are often not done because they seem very hard. But that's often a technology barrier that's in people's heads but doesn't translate because it's not that hard to actually do those things anymore. So yeah, we're excited. We almost helped run with the Vallejo participatory budgeting but couldn't commit at the time. So yeah, that stuff's exciting. I'm going to go to this side because that's noisy side of the room. No question.
I have one, but I don't know how. You just mentioned the guys that are coding, and how many of these of your team or other teams are ladies? Is it
a lot?
mostly, yeah.
So I'm using the guys term colloquially, as Americans do, not Australians. But yeah, we're actually really diverse, which is awesome. We've actually worked to achieve that and have more to do though. And so we have a large female contingency and we have good ethnic diversity as well. And that's Oakland in general, but it's not been easy necessarily to naturally get that because the tech sector is generally pretty white and guyish, right? But Oakland is a good representation of a community that has broad representation on a lot of levels. But overall, I'm a stats guy, and so overall, we're still underrepresented in the Afro-American community, but we have a growing Latino presence in the organization, and there are a lot of Latino-led technology and design companies in Oakland. And that also means, for us, it means we've actually got to do outreach across the city. And we've done a bit of that, but obviously the message, if you're a young white technology worker in downtown Oakland, you're going to care about something different than someone who's living in, say, Sobronte Park, where there's a lot of violence. And so your experience is different, and so why would I give a crap about this? So our message doesn't particularly resonate with people across the city because we're dealing with things that seem to be as sort of niche, cool things that don't necessarily matter to city life across the city. But that's something that we're interested in changing. And so we have part of our communication work group is around not just getting the message out about what we're doing, but actually engaging people across the city. And that means that we'll run up against things that aren't what we planned because people's experiences are different at different neighborhoods in the city. and that means that the solutions need to be different as well. But I think most of us that are running this work think that a lot of this stuff does matter because it's a root cause of a lot of the problems. And so, because we're an anti-poverty organization, Urban Strategies Council, we deal with everything from crime and re-entry and public safety and healthcare and education systems. And a lot of those things fail and don't work at core because government technology base is broken and government processes are broken and government is disconnected and untrusted. And so at a core of why we say we know how to fix a lot of these things, but we've known them for 30 years and haven't done them socially. And at a core, a lot of that is government functioning is broken. And so a lot of the ideas that work elsewhere break in Oakland. And a lot of that comes down to because our government needs help to be better. And so it's definitely a two-step connection, but for me it's not that much of a connection from a social justice mission because what we're trying to do and change and fix is the very core of society. If that doesn't work, then all the community organizations and all the education programs fail at some point because the system they're relying on to provide services and everything else is struggling itself. So, yeah, long answer, but lots of goals.
When are you going to publish data that Copwatch can use for the Oakland Police and the Bar Police?
Right.
There's a couple of ideas out of last year's Code for Oakland around one was a Top Cop app that let people review police experience, and so the interactions with cops. It's still in development mode. I'm not sure if they're going to launch it or not, but it was functioning. So there's some interesting pieces on that angle.
There are probably some libel issues that might come into play with that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Everything lawyers can fix, right? Big old disclaimers saves the world.